The jungle swallowed sound in a way nothing else could. In the steaming green heart of the Pacific, every breath felt too loud, every shift of a boot seemed enough to draw a bullet. Yet beneath a rusted aircraft fuselage half-eaten by vines, one man worked with calm focus, bending broken metal into something far more dangerous than the Japanese soldiers sweeping the ridge above could ever imagine. His name was Sergeant Thomas Wrench Harlow, a quiet farm-born mechanic from Nebraska who understood machines better than people. They gave him the nickname because he could fix anything: tractors, trucks, aircraft, radios, anything built with bolts and metal. War baffled him. Machines made sense. But war didn't care what made sense, and on Morro Atoll in 1943, nothing mattered except surviving one more night. The Pacific Campaign was roaring forward, but tiny, isolated islands like Morro were often forgotten. They were stepping stones for aircraft, small dots of jungle that meant nothing until someone needed them. Wrench had arrived with 8 engineers to build a refueling strip for B-25 bombers. Before they completed even half the runway, a Japanese naval group shelled the island, tore the coastline apart, and forced the engineers into the jungle with nothing but whatever they could carry. In the first week, malaria, hunger, and enemy patrols reduced their number from 9 to 3. Only Wrench, Corporal Joseph Rayner, and Private Eddie Collins lived long enough to understand how dangerous this forgotten island truly was. Rayner, sharp-tongued, stubborn, and endlessly bitter at command, had once led jungle patrols and knew the terrain better than both of them. Collins was the opposite, young, hopeful, sometimes too hopeful, relying on jokes to keep the nights bearable. And Wrench, well, Wrench was the one both men silently counted on when the world grew dark. For 12 days they'd lived on rainwater dripping from leaves and whatever wild fruit didn't kill them. Their boots rotted. Their rations turned into mold. Their ammunition dwindled to a handful of bullets. By day 12, they were certain they wouldn't see day 13. But the jungle, cruel as it was, sometimes offered strange gifts. Just after dawn, they stumbled upon it, a crashed Japanese Ki-43 fighter, its wings sheared off and its nose buried into a pair of massive trees. The pilot's remains had long been claimed by insects, but the plane itself still held potential. Collins stared up at it in awe. "Think it still has fuel?" he asked hopefully. Rayner shook his head and muttered that he was thinking more about the guns the plane once carried. The twin Type 89 machine guns were missing, ripped free in the crash, but pieces were everywhere: bent barrels, damaged feed trays, springs, mounts, and scraps of cockpit mechanics. Wrench ran his fingers along the cold metal, mind already buzzing. "Not dead," he murmured. "Just disassembled." Rayner looked sharply at him. "What are you thinking?" Wrench slowly exhaled. "I think I can build us a gun." For the next 3 days he became a man possessed. He scavenged every screw, every wire coil, every strip of metal that wasn't fused to the frame. He worked with the single-minded intensity of someone who refused to die without trying everything first. He built an improvised firing mechanism from the aircraft's rudder linkage. He hammered bent springs into shape using rocks. He fashioned a crude trigger from a snapped control rod. He even shaped a firing spring from the landing gear's tension wire. Collins fetched water and watched in awe. Rayner stood guard, clutching his last few bullets like prayer beads. The jungle heat soaked them. Mosquitoes feasted on them. Every rustle in the trees felt like death circling closer. But Wrench kept working until his fingers blistered and bled. On the 3rd night, the gun lay before him, ugly, uneven, a Frankenstein weapon of welded scraps and improbable engineering. Collins swallowed nervously. "You really think it'll fire?" Wrench didn't look up. "No," he said confidently, tightening a bolt. "I know it will." At dawn they tested it. Wrench braced the barrel on a fallen banyan tree, pointed at a rotted trunk, and squeezed the handmade trigger. For a terrifying moment nothing happened. Then, rat-tat-tat. The weapon kicked violently, spitting out a burst of fire and splintering the target into dust. Rayner's jaw hung open. Collins nearly fell over. Wrench simply stared at the smoking barrel as if confirming the laws of physics still obeyed him. It worked. but good fortune rarely comes without its shadow. 2 days later, short bursts of rifle fire cracked from the far side of the jungle. Japanese scouts. They had found tracks, American tracks. Rayner's face tightened. They're close. A squad of 15 to 20 soldiers swept the terrain with disciplined formation. They were armed, organized, and fresh. Meanwhile, the Americans had barely enough strength to walk. Collins whispered. Too many. Wrench looked at his two companions. Running gets us hunted, he said steadily. Fighting gives us a chance. It wasn't courage. It was necessity. They chose a slope above a narrow ravine where the Japanese would be forced to move through single file. Wrench set up his makeshift gun on a tripod built from landing gear rods. Rayner and Collins positioned themselves behind foliage, every heartbeat echoing like a drum. The Japanese moved with terrifying silence. 10 yards. 5. 3. Wrench pulled the trigger. The jungle detonated with gunfire. 3 Japanese soldiers dropped instantly. Confusion swept the squad. This forgotten island wasn't supposed to have machine guns. They dove for cover, shouting orders. The Americans fired their remaining rifle shots. For a moment, hope felt real. But hope in war is always chased by fear. 2 Japanese soldiers flanked right. Wrench swung the barrel and fired, dropping both. The squad leader barked commands, and suddenly 10 Japanese charged the ridge in a desperate push. Wrench held the trigger down, rat-tat-tat-tat, but the gun jammed with a violent clang. Wrench! Collins shouted, panicked. Rayner aimed, fired, missed. The Japanese were 10 yards away. Wrench's hands burned as he tore open the chamber, clearing a bent cartridge. A hot burst of steam scorched his skin. He slammed the bolt forward just as Rayner rolled aside. The gun burst alive again. 4 more Japanese dropped in seconds. The survivors skidded to a halt, disbelief etched in their eyes. 3 Americans? Impossible. A machine gun built from aircraft scraps? Unthinkable. But fear didn't care what was possible. They hesitated. The officer signaled his last 3 men. Wrench pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. No ammo left. The Japanese charged, screaming. Collins froze. Rayner raised his knife. Wrench grabbed the nearest metal bar, an old wing strut, and charged down the slope with a roar that startled even him. He swung wildly, cracking a soldier across the jaw. Collins tackled another. Rayner grappled with the third in the mud, struggling desperately. A gunshot echoed. The Japanese soldier above Rayner fell sideways, dead. Collins stood behind them, shaking, holding a captured rifle. It had 1 bullet left, he whispered. Silence settled over the ravine, thick, heavy, unreal. 20 Japanese soldiers lay dead among roots and vines. 3 half-starved Americans stood over them, barely breathing, barely conscious, yet alive. For the first time in weeks, the jungle seemed quiet in a way that didn't feel threatening. The battle had echoed across the entire island. Hours later, they heard the faint drone of engines. Rayner looked up first, eyes widening. Plane! American engine! A PBY Catalina glided low overhead. It saw smoke. Movement. Bodies. Signs of life. By dusk, a rescue boat reached the shore. As medics carried Wrench toward extraction, an officer stopped, staring at the twisted metal weapon lying beside him. You built this? He asked incredulously. Wrench nodded weakly. And you used it? Before Wrench could answer, Rayner stepped forward. Sir, he killed 20 Japanese with that thing. The officer stared at Wrench as though looking at a ghost. Well, Sergeant, the Japanese will never believe this. Wrench managed a faint smile. They didn't believe it, he whispered. Not until the bullets hit. Wrench survived the war. He returned home, never seeking medals or glory, though he earned both. He simply returned to machines, tractors, engines, things that didn't bleed. But among those who studied war or aircraft engineering, his impossible creation became legend. On a nameless island in the Pacific, in the worst conditions imaginable, A quiet mechanic fixed the one thing everyone else thought was beyond repair, the line between life and death. And he fixed it with metal scraps, scorched fingers, unbreakable will, and a gun no one believed could ever exist.